I am unashamed. What about you?
All right, welcome back to Unashamed. We still going during duck season, which explains why Dad is still got his face paint on.
Oh yeah, I watched mine.
Commando.
It was kind of frustrating.
Commander goes commando.
It was a bit. Well, it's never frustrating when you're duck hunting. But when we got there, all the ducks were there, but they were on the other end of the hole that we have. It's an area. So what we determined today, that really this has become a rule. We used to go where the ducks are. That's the number one rule in duck hunting.
Yeah.
But at this age and stage of the career of all the duck hunters, you go to where the most comfortable blind is, where there is a heater, a seat, a nice comfy seat.
Proximity to get out to do the podcast.
So
there's a lot of issues.
Yeah, it's caused some interesting discussions because you're looking and everybody's thinking we need to be down there. But it's 32 degrees and there's no comfy blind down there. So instead of killing 20, we shot about 8.
Which is not bad.
It wasn't bad. No.
I mean, you kill something.
But that's where we're at. And I think everybody was they were like...
Is everybody okay with it?
Everybody was fine with it. I mean...
Are you mad at them anymore, Dad? Are you?
Oh, not near as mad as I used to be at them.
So they're coming up with a plan to build more comfy blinds in between the seasons. Because no matter what happens... I mean, look, we have the front of the year fixing to come here, which is unusual for Louisiana. They say, now we'll see, because weathermen are...
Notoriously wrong.
Well, you should trust them the least of any person on the planet. It doesn't say anything about their character, and they may be
they're trying.
Warm-loving people, but when they say something, they're not looking outside. They're inside making calls about weather.
It's all the computer now. You'll hear them say that when they're talking about hurricanes, which they're pretty accurate on, but they'll say the computer model. That's the word I hear all the time. The computer model says this. So you're right. They're calling the weather from some deep cave somewhere
3 days
in front
ago,
of a computer screen.
We sat in the Elm Hole, one of our famous holes, and we only go there when it's clear. And they said it was going to clear off at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I said, well, it's worth it. So let's go there. So we went there.
So you believed.
Well, we saw the line, the clear line. We could see it off in the distance.
Mm-hmm.
But 8 o'clock came and went.
Still out there.
Then 9 o'clock came and went. And then 10 o'clock came and went. So I looked it up, and it said it was clear.
But you were outside.
I'm looking. I said, it's not clear. This is not a mistake. This is just a outright lie. It's clear. No, I'm looking. It is not clear. And then they said it'd be clear the next hour. And guess what? The next hour, nope. So they were close, but just close.
Well, maybe where they were, it was clear. Maybe they were just not where you were.
I'm telling you, everybody's inside. They're not looking. They thought it was going to come through, but it didn't. It stalled. So today they said it was going to be cloudy. Well, we got there, and guess what?
Clear.
It was clear. And now it got cloudy at about 9, but it was clear. But it was cloudy 100%. The sun was not in the equation. And actually, when we first started hunting today, there was not one cloud in the sky. I mean, how could you be that far off? So I don't know. They need to do something about that, but I'm not even sure what my point was. I got off on the weather people. No.
Well, that's why they had during the hurricanes, they send them out, which is the right way to do it. You see them guys, they're out in it.
Well, I have respect for them.
Oh, me too, because they're like, when they're telling you the wind's blowing 100 miles an hour, they're holding on to something.
I remember my point. So the weathermen are saying that Thursday, which is tomorrow, look, the high is going to be 60.
Yep.
And they say, now this is what they're saying. This is quite the prediction. They say at 9 o'clock at night, No, well, let me just start over. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it's going to be 60.
Yep.
At 9 o'clock at night, it's going to be 32. And right at midnight, it's going to be 12. Now, I'm just going to have to...
A 50-degree drop in about less than 8 hours.
I'm going to have to stay up to midnight. I probably won't make it.
You'll never make it.
So they say in one day, it's going to go from 60 to 12. But you know what that means? You say, why are you bringing this up? When you see something like that, if it gets anywhere close to that, the ducks are headed south.
They're moving.
So we want to update even our non-duck hunting people that the migration is fixing to occur.
Yeah, because if we're getting that here, you follow the duck back up the country, and it's going to be
negative,
ridiculous. Yeah,
so this is good times have come our way. The stars are aligning. The next time we're together, I will give you a report.
We should have a whacking story. We should.
But you could go with you could believe Hebrews chapter 1, and you live that way, or you could say whatever the Weather Channel says. They're right. In the beginning, O Lord.
Is this a weather verse, Phil? You're gonna.
This is weather.
Okay.
You laid the foundation of the earth, and the heavens are the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment. You, God, will roll them up like a robe, like a garment. They will be changed, but you remain the same, and your years will never end. The cosmos is predicted to fall apart, disappear, wear out, whatever you want to call it. So there's two schools of thought. Or bring the Weather Channel people in, and they'll have guests on to show you how to save the planet.
Oh, you had big picture, yeah.
The Hebrew writer says, you're not going to save it.
So Phil's giving you a weather forecast that at some point it's going to get really hot and a lot of changes are going to happen. And
that is correct.
It is going to be an impossible venture to combat the elements. So, but if you're with God, you will be saved from
That's right.
the destruction of the elements.
That's right. So I would just say, I love them, you know.
Yeah.
But the chicks, the little chicks get up and they tell you what's fixing to happen. But many, many, many times they're wrong.
Yeah.
Weather's hard to predict
Yeah, it is.
perfectly all the time. It's almost impossible. I think it is impossible.
Oh, it's impossible.
But what they've got planning coming on here in the next 2 or 3 days, granted, it's going to be a big blowout from the northwest. It's coming down. But to do it at the scale and the speed is what Jase is saying. I
can count the times on one hand where I saw it go from 60 to 12.
Yeah.
In the same day.
Right.
That's what they're saying. We'll see.
I mean, that's a pretty. I mean, I've seen some pretty good drops. I don't know if I've seen one
60 to 12. We've gone years without it getting below 20 degrees.
Yeah.
So I mean, for us to go 12 and then the next night's like 15 and then 18. I mean, when you start seeing that, it's cold, but it's good for duck hunting. So my point was, I think we're going to be able to have a successful duck season in comfort, because if you get that kind of weather, I think we can go to any blind we want to, as long as it's not frozen.
Yep.
And have our little heat. And
Louisiana, you very seldom, if ever, while I've been on there, 3 days of in the teens. It doesn't get above the teens.
No, it doesn't.
We rarely see that.
But we had they were calling it the snowpocalypse that came.
Yeah, we did.
A year or two ago.
A couple years ago.
Yeah, that was pretty in Texas.
And what happened down here?
Really bad.
Mass chaos and panic. You go to the grocery store, there's nothing there.
That's right.
People went crazy.
People blowing home. Oh, yeah, it's just because we're not really set up for it either.
No.
Pipes are busting. People are crying. It's
I have a pretty good hill. My house is on top of a hill. So I never left the house for about 5 days, but I did have
Well, you couldn't leave.
No, I did have a young man that had 4-wheel drive, and after 2 or 3 days, he'd bring us by a little bit of grub and some groceries.
I had a big bunch of teenagers that got stranded at my house, and if you spend a week with a bunch of teenagers, Jesus will come up in a deep, personal, profound way, because you get to know people when you're trapped.
Right.
And it took 2 or 3 days, but I thought, yep, we need Jesus here desperately.
The question is, when they left, did they feel like they needed to?
Well, the jury's still out, Al. But
yeah.
I know one thing: God works, and I think that was needed.
Yeah.
When all the disciples were predicted by Jesus, he said he's going to do the destruction of the cosmos. The same Jesus said all of his followers, Peter, all of them, the disciples, they were all going to desert him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They're
that's
saying, we'll never do that. Well,
yeah, where did we leave off?
We're in Mark 14. So we were on the last podcast, we were talking about the Lord's Supper. And it was actually a Passover meal, but then Jesus was instituting sort of the new way to these disciples, because the Jase talked about experiencing Passover meal. You don't have the bread and the cup, that's new. That wasn't part of the old regime. And so he introduces that. And we read about it also.
Well, I think they did it, but it was like not highlighted.
Right.
The lamb was kind of the main
Yeah.
highlight. And so we were saying the blood was going to represent the wine, but his blood. Of course, they, honestly, they probably had a hard time wrapping their head. They're like, what is he saying?
I don't think they were lying when they said, we'll never leave you. Peter especially said, we will never leave you. We will never desert you. I don't think it was an outright lie. I think in his mind, he said, I'll be there till the cows come home here.
I agree.
What I think happened was, and the reason I think Mark put the story within the story like he did many times, is because you got to remember they were looking at this like there's people, they're getting concerned about who Jesus is. There are plots, though, to kill him, and they're running with him. And so I think that's why Judas, everybody kind of looked at how this is going to end. Just think about it. If you were running there, so they all had this decision that they had to make of, and now how far am I going to go with this thing? Because this is getting dangerous. And
he's been saying from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all 4 of them.
He's been saying he's going to die. Yeah.
He said, I'm going to die, which they like, but then the part about 3 days I'll rise again. That's still not they're thinking, we don't know what that means, but that's not going to happen.
Well, they definitely didn't believe it, because there's too many passages where it says
somebody tells
after he was raised.
Somebody tells you they're going to die in 3 days, they'll be raised. It's tough.
Well,
I would say now, since it happened, it's possible, but we'll see.
I don't think they heard anything after I'm going to die.
That's right.
That's right.
Oh, and you're going to be raised. Okay, yeah, we'll make a note of that. Raised later.
Well, let me read what he says in Mark, and then I want to jump over to Luke, in Luke's account, because he says something different there, and I just want to get y'all's take on it. Let's before I read this, let's take our first break. So it's a new year, and people are always looking for new things to try. We've got a good one for you. One of our sponsors, Helix Sleep, provides just absolutely the best mattress that we've ever slept on, and we all use them now. Everybody, we finally got one for Mom and Dad loves it as well. You can check, everybody's unique, and so they have a different way that they like to sleep, a little firmer, a little softer, and that's what these guys do. They're going to fit that mattress to exactly what you want and what you need. They have a 100-night risk-free trial, so I mean, there's literally nothing to lose. Helix mattresses come with a 10 or 15-year warranty, depending on the model. So they're going to stand by their product, and you're going to absolutely love it. They support military, first responders, teachers, students. There's a lot of special discounts that you can get on their site. So we want you to try it out. You got that 100-night risk-free. They've got over 12,000 5-star reviews. So people love Helix, and no more than those of us on this podcast. So they're offering up to $200 off of all mattress orders and 2 free pillows for our listeners. So go to helixsleep.com/unashamed. You're going to take a little quiz. Make sure the mattress you get is right for you. helixsleep.com/unashamed. $200 off, 2 free pillows. Better sleep. Start now. All right, so this is Mark 14:27. This is right after the Lord's Supper part. He says, "You will all fall away." Yeah, which, there's your opening statement. Imagine they're sitting there looking at it.
Well, this is after they'd sung a hymn.
They just sung a hymn.
I mean,
which we didn't mention this on the last podcast, Jace, but I thought it was interesting that this is a very sort of solemn, sad night because of everything that's happening.
This last night.
Judas has been outed. He's saying he's going to die. He washed their feet. Now and they have this song in there, which I wonder if it was.
He outed himself. I mean, the next time you see Judas, he's going to be coming with
That's right.
with a bunch of soldiers with swords and clubs.
Most people don't realize if something is written from one of the prophets, and then someone comes along and says, the time has come for that to happen.
This is it.
This is it. And he quotes Zechariah.
Right.
Well, they were probably well versed in the Bible, the people of that day, and all the disciples. But they still didn't grasp.
Right.
Just because Zechariah said it 800 years ago, I mean, there's no reason to believe. We can believe it. I mean.
And I'm not. Yes, it would be interesting to know how much they actually knew about that. So he says, "You all fall away." Then he says, as you said, that, "For it is written." So now he's gonna give them the Old Testament quote. "I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered." So he's the shepherd, they're the sheep, and so he quotes this from Zechariah 13, and then he said, "But after I have risen, I will go ahead of you into Galilee." Okay,
let me tell you something. I believe it. I began to believe it. But I was kind of in the camp, not that I had deserted him. I never had him to desert. But to look at it in that light,
put yourself in their shoes.
It does take faith.
It does.
And Jesus is acknowledging that once you get to, when you're getting all the blessings of following him, you're healing your little world of their diseases, and it's exciting, and miracles are happening, and you raise a guy from the dead. But
and they participated in some of that. So then all of a sudden you get that.
You're
It's
talking about
helping. If it's helping with
about
all
heaven.
that, but it's still.
Well, but you're talking about heaven, and then all of a sudden you start realizing this is going to cost me, especially your reputation. Your family's at risk. I mean, this is turned into some kind of mafia hit.
Right.
And you're with the wrong guy. You're with the guy saying, "Hey, we're going to fight with some different weapons," which that's actually mentioned in Luke.
Yeah, which is I want to get to.
We'll get to it.
All right, so let me finish this. So he says, so Peter responds to Jesus. And Peter, there's no doubt about it, out of the 12, throughout all these 3 years, he's the most vocal. He's the one willing to jump in, good or bad. Peter declares, "Even if all fall away, I will not." So another point.
I'll still heal.
I'm
still be
here.
here, Lord.
You can depend on me.
So this is like someone pictured this as, I thought it was a good point, Peter on trial at the same time Jesus was going to go on trial. And Peter swore himself in right off the bat.
That's right.
I mean, he basically put his hand on the Bible and said,
"I'm in.
If all fall away, I will not. I swear."
That's right. So Jesus responds to him, "I tell you the truth," Jesus answered, "today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself would disown me 3 times."
Not once, 3 times.
3 times. Which, man, that was. But Peter insisted emphatically, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And all the others said the same.
A lot of people look at this and they're saying, "Well, it's just not fair to Peter."
Right.
I mean, he put too much on his. He tried to carry too much. But then a lot of other ones say, you mean to tell me y'all follow somebody based on readings like this? I said, that's why we follow him.
That's right.
But the Luke's version really reveals, I think, a lot. And before you read it, Al, I was going to skip down and read 54 of Mark 14 and we'll obviously get to this in a future podcast. So Judas leads the army to Jesus. He does the deed. He betrays him with a kiss. And so they haul Jesus off. Well, you notice Peter was following him at a distance, right in the courtyard. But the reason I'm bringing that up is because I've heard a lot of sermons about that, and they're like, "Oh, when you're following at a distance,"
Yeah.
you know. But I think it's more positive. I think he was trying to hold his word.
Yeah.
He said, "I'm not," because look, now we're no longer playing around. Armed men have taken your leader, and they're fixed to take him to a trial. And you being associated with him means you're in the crosshairs. So even him following at a distance was risky.
And we also know,
The
Jace,
weight of it all had not quite reached Peter.
yeah, but
I think he was defending his oath.
so
He was like,
here's why you're right. I agree with that. It's consistent that this is a positive, because we know from the other accounts that, remember, there was a ruckus when this happened that Mark doesn't record.
Well, we're fixed to read that. I think you're going to read that in 22.
Where is it at?
It's in 22.
Where he cuts a zero?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's in.
I don't think
I think it is.
It's not in Mark, I don't think.
No, I'm talking about it's in Luke.
Let's see.
No, it's here. So he's like in verse. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's in verse 52.
right.
No. Yeah, it's in
Luke 22, 47.
Luke 22. So we'll back up and let you read.
But my point is that what happens is you pick it up later in Mark that he's following from a distance, but when Peter whips out the sword, which we're going to read about in Luke, about the swords, and he cuts a guy zero, so like he's ready to fight this thing out. I mean,
Right.
let's do this. You know, I mean, he to the point he is defending, but I think what throws him completely off is when Jesus said, put that away, and he puts the guy's ear back on, and it's like, we're not going to deal with it that way. And at that moment, I think Peter's like, well, how am I going to stick with him if we can't fight it out? You see what I'm saying?
It's about this time that the guy who lost his ear heard the little conversation about, no, I'm going to put it back on right quick. Is that all right? I mean, it's about along in there when even his accusers, some of them are probably thinking, what have I got myself into? I just had my ear cut off, and whoever this guy is we're arresting, he just puts it back on.
He was a servant of the chief priest. I've thought about that before.
You're talking about a quick surgery.
Surely that guy had to have become a believer.
Well, but they probably got back and they're like, no, what? Did somebody raise a sword? Because that's all part of the fulfillment of prophecy about, you're in Luke 22:37 where it says, I mean, this is a highly controversial passage, but really, Jesus, it's not controversial. When he said in verse 36, let me just read it.
Yeah, read it.
How about that?
Yep.
So if you back up to where we're at.
Look, start in verse 34 or 33.
How about 31?
Yeah, there you go.
Because he makes a prediction.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
says,
yeah.
Simon, Simon. And he, that was customary when you say that to mean affectionately. He's like, Simon.
It'd be like if I said, Jase. I mean, like,
just hang on, brother. Satan has asked to sift you as wheat. Now, that's very interesting.
I find this fascinating.
Oh, I just love this. And but I have interceded for you or prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. Now, look, that's a prelude to what happens to us. It's Jesus at the right hand of God in 1 John 2.
That's right.
There's no doubt in my mind about that.
But it's also, Jase, a glimpse into Jesus' ability to go back and forth mentally or some way, spiritually,
To
into
get
the
you
other
out
realm.
of some real messes.
Exactly. I
Well,
mean, in other
he
words,
realizes that, okay, you're fixed to have the most epic failure of all times. I mean, really, you're going to deny me and curse me in my face at my most important need after you said you weren't.
That's right.
And you're going to do it.
Right.
And now he then jumps ahead, and Jesus says in verse 32, this is very powerful. He says, and when you have turned back, which you remember Judas was the exact opposite phrase when he said he's turned away.
That's right.
And then he said he's going to betray me, but he said he turned away from me. So at some point he turned away and he's going to betray me. Well, Peter, he's already saying that Satan came and wanted to sift you like wheat, whatever that means, can't be good for Peter.
Not good.
But Jesus stepped in, interceded, and when you have turned back, look, strengthen your brothers. This is what I like about this statement, because no other religion on the planet would ever put a guy like Peter in charge after what he does.
That's right.
That's right.
You have been...
He'd be blackballed forever.
Oh, you're disqualified. I mean, you were called Satan at one point.
Yep.
You have made this, running your mouth the whole time.
One
and then
blunder after another.
make a prediction of, I'll go to prison, I'll die with you. And about 20 minutes later, you are literally doing the exact opposite, denying and cursing your master.
And also, the lesson for us is we should understand that God's there to help us, to mediate for us.
Oh, it shows
Jesus.
you. He is.
He's there
he is
when you say,
ultimately-
"Well, I'll do this," and you don't do it. Well, I'm gone, so I might as well go back to the world, because he's not going. He don't realize how far God will go to keep you lined out, keep you.
So watch what Peter
Hang
says.
on, let's take a break.
Watch what Peter says. But he replied, Lord, I'm ready to go with you to prison and to death. Now, here's the interesting part, is that Peter was actually, he committed his, I think, betrayal in a way, as far as not acknowledging that he knew Jesus, and the denial that we'll read later, and just made a sham out of this whole thing. So he couldn't be any more guilty. And basically, Jesus forgives him, lets him off the hook.
Mm-hmm.
Even though he was just as guilty. This is as bad, I think, as you could do to be a follower of Jesus, because it's really about, that's why later on they all went to their death rather than deny him. And here's the irony of it is Jesus didn't commit a crime on his trial, and he died so that he could forgive this very act that Peter shouldn't have got away with.
Yeah.
No religious entity in the world would ever elevate him. They just wouldn't do it. But they're missing the key point, is that grace transforms us.
That's right.
It's God looks at his righteousness, the Son. So that's why, in 1 John 2, you ever notice that it says we have one who speaks, the Father in our defense, Jesus Christ. And it says he is righteous and just. And so you say, well, what does that mean? Because we always think that Jesus, representing us up there saying, well, old Phil messed up again, give him another try. But it's not like that at all.
Mm.
It's just because he sees Jesus's righteousness with his innocent sacrifice for the forgiveness. He paid our debt full. You don't have to pay them again. And that shows you his justice because of Jesus dying. This is an illustration of that before it happens.
That's right. And what's interesting, Jase, is he lets him know that when you're healed from something, he says, when you turn back, in other words, when you understand this, you don't even understand it yet, but when you do, strengthen your brothers. You're going to have an opportunity because of what I'm going to help you overcome to then strengthen other people. This is what's setting up in my mind, Jesus telling Peter, you're going to be the leader of the movement.
Jesus had already handpicked him in
No doubt.
Matthew 16 when he said, I'm giving you the keys to the kingdom.
Blessed are you.
You'll be back around.
That's right.
Remember, do you love me? Well, do you love me?
Which we'll get to that, in the after.
1 John 1:9 is the verse I was claiming. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just. So he's just because of who's doing the forgiving, which is Jesus, and it's not us. So anyway, so then he says, Jesus answered, well, I tell you, Peter, before the rooster crows today, you will deny 3 times that you know me. But you got to remember, he just said, you're going to, the evil one wants to sift you like wheat, and so that your faith, may not fail, is what Jesus interceded for. And then you're going to turn back. So he's predicting that you're going to deny me, but you're going to turn back to me. I mean, it's probably making his head spin.
Okay, now it's like, no. Not only will you not go to prison for me, and will you not die for me, you will say 3 times you don't even know me.
Yeah. And the third time was horrible.
Oh.
It was like calling down curses.
Right, yeah, you just cussed him.
And Jesus stared at him in that moment.
That's right.
I don't know if that's in Luke.
It may have been
one of the Gospels. When he did that third, it says while Jesus stared, he called down curses.
Yeah, that's in this one. That's in Luke. Yeah.
So then, no, I was going to get to this, and I don't want to wallow in this, but it's only recorded in Luke, and people have made a huge deal out of this, and I do want to mention it because this will be our only chance, I guess. So, verse 35, then Jesus asked them, when I sent you without purse, bag, or sandals, did you lack anything? So you remember that when he sent out the 72 and he gave them the power, and he's like, don't carry anything.
That's right.
Now all of a sudden, they said nothing, they answered. He said to them, but now if you have a purse, take it, and also a bag. And if you don't have a sword, sell your cloak and buy one. Well, that's the controversial, because they're like, well, wait a minute now. What? I thought this was a spiritual thing, not a physical thing. Well, he explains why he says that in 37. And this is, I don't know what y'all have to say about it, but this is my take on it. Because then he says, it is written, and this is in Isaiah 53.
Yep.
And he was numbered with the transgressors. And I tell you that this must be fulfilled in me. Yes, what is written about me is reaching its fulfillment. So Isaiah said he's going to be numbered with the transgressors. And what I get out of this is when the men with clubs and swords came, because it's hard to arrest an innocent man for this severe a crime. But it had a look about it because they had their swords, which normally, because he said, the disciples said, see, Lord, here are 2 swords. He said, that's enough, he replied. So you said, well, what was he encouraging them to do, some kind of rebellion? Well, we know the end of the story. No, because when they come up there, Peter took one, because Peter got the idea based on what he just said. Oh, we fixed a fight.
Exactly.
So he strikes the man's ear, and then Jesus says in verse 51, no more of this. Then he heals the guy's ear. He touched the man's ear and healed him, which is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And so really, now look, I know people have written narratives about, the Second Amendment and the right to defend yourself and all, and look, which are all things I believe, but I think you're trying to get way too much out of here than, that he wasn't talking about later on the Second Amendment in this. He was talking about some swords and having a look of their transgressors, and there's an uprising.
Right.
That they got to put down. Because that's the way they were going to sell that this guy needs to die. Now, why God chose to do that, I don't know. But he told Isaiah to prophesy it, and Jesus was fully aware of having that fulfilled. And so he's like, well, how many swords you got? 2. Yeah.
Yeah, you're good.
So, I mean, is that how you see it?
So let's take a break. Yes, and then I think there's one more element that he's referring to, and that is he's basically saying, I sent you out. Don't take anything. I'm here. I sent you on a mission while I'm here, but I'm fixing to not be here, and it's fixing to get rough. I think the idea of the transgressors, too, is the idea that you're going to be lumped in with me once I'm gone. So you better get everything you got ready because it's fixing to be for you like it is for me.
You're on the run now,
yeah.
and the moment that you're declaring Jesus, and look, there's not a whole lot has changed. We've talked about before. Right now, there's more persecution of Christians than has ever been. I mean, there are in some countries. I mean, there are people dying by the hundreds, And so,
And America doesn't seem to be really happy with us.
well, exactly. So, and there may come a day, but
you think about it, Jace, in the moment of their understanding, this was all they could understand, and Jesus went with it. But what's going to happen is, when we get over to the book of Acts, they're going to do the same thing to Peter they did to Jesus. Remember, they got after him, they hatched a plan, they arrested him, they were fixing to execute him, and then, an angel just shows up and he walks right out of the prison, and everybody falls down. And then Peter gets it like Jesus did. He's like, oh, okay, I got it. This is bigger than swords. This is spiritual warfare, and I got God on my side. Which is why he went willingly to his death, in the 60s and was crucified upside down.
Yeah,
So
and somewhere he says, look, I could call legions of angels and, one of the Gospels.
Right.
In this one, in Luke, he just says, am I leading a rebellion? This is 52. That you have come with swords and clubs. Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour when darkness reigns. And so then they seized him and led him away. And then
that's when Peter. So Peter, pick it up from there.
Yeah, then Peter's following at a distance. So when they had kindled a fire, and I'm in Luke 22:55, but Mark says about the same thing.
Similar, yeah.
Yeah, middle of the courtyard, and sat down together. Peter sat down with them. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, "This man was with them," but he denied it. I don't know him. A little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." I am not. 59, about an hour later, another asserted, certainly this fellow was with him, for he is of Galilee. Peter replied, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." And some of the others say that
call down curses.
Call down curses. Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed. Now here's where I was said, the Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word the Lord had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times. And he went outside and wept bitterly.
That's heavy.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wonder, Jason, that weeping moment, obviously he's devastated because, he was so bold in his prediction and all that. Now he realized, okay, Jesus was right. But I wonder if he remembered in that moment when Jesus said, but when he turned back, strengthen the brothers. I wonder if that just gave him just enough comfort. Because, at this point, he's shattered, and again, I think the reason why it hit him so hard was because he wasn't going to be able to fight in the moment like he thought this fight needed to be fought. That we're going to take over. He knew Jesus had all this power. He experienced that. Mm-hmm. But now we're in the moment, and the death is settled in. A lot of people will say they'll die for something until they get into the moment where you're facing it eye to eye. And then all of a sudden, it's a whole different ballgame. And it is for any of us, you hear stories about people, even believers to this day, that are asked to renounce their faith and say no and get killed. Mm-hmm. That's the ultimate.
Yeah. So you fast forward to, and we'll read this awesome passage in John 21:7. So here's now Jesus, this is post-resurrection. So he dies. Last time you leave off with Peter, he's weeping bitterly, and then there's some appearances, and they have the excitement that Jesus has risen. But we still have this dark cloud hanging over Peter. And it's not like anything that we haven't experienced. It's called guilt and shame.
That's right.
And your reputation.
That's right.
If you think about it, he went out of his way. I'll die with you. I'll go to prison. Your reputation is ruined. You did it to yourself. And so when they said it's the Lord in verse 7, Peter, as soon as Simon Peter heard him say, this is verse 7 of 21 of John, it is the Lord. He wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. He's not messing around. And so Jesus gets some fish. Verse 11, Simon Peter climbed aboard, dragged the net ashore, is full of all these fish. Come, let's eat breakfast. They have breakfast. So then in verse 15, because I felt like I need to read that because it was a moment.
And remember, Jace, before you read this is the exact way in Luke chapter 5 that Jesus first impacted Peter. Remember, they had been fishing. He was sitting in his boat, and he said, "Why don't we let out a little and put the nets back out?" And Peter's like, "Oh, Lord, we know what we're doing. We fished all night. We didn't catch anything. Because you say so, I'll do it." Then they caught that big, large catch of fish. And you remember Peter looked at Jesus and said, "Go away from me, I'm a sinful man." So I think that's significant that Jesus decides to have the same scenario here in this moment. All right, go ahead.
So when they had finished, verse 15, eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me more than these?" Because you got to remember, where did all this, why is he bringing this up? Because he said, hey, if all of them fall, I won't. There's no doubt he was making that connection because that's just where we left off. Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you truly love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you," which I thought was a really good answer. He's like, you know, you're asking, but you know that it's true. Jesus said, "Feed my sheep. I tell you the truth, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go." And Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, "Follow me."
Which is what he
And
originally
let
said.
me tell you, a warrior was born from this point on.
Right.
Yep.
So let's take our last break. One of the things, Jase, is interesting that when I studied this, when we studied John, and it might be worth mentioning, and I don't know that it necessarily impacts it. The three questions seem to coincide with the three denials, obviously. But one of the things you do realize in the Greek is that the first two, there's different Greek words for love. First two times he says, "Do you love me?" The Greek word is phileo, which means friendship. Basically, it's where we get brotherly love, Philadelphia. The third time he asked him, he used the word agape, which you don't see a lot until you get over into the epistles. Agape means a self-sacrificing, all-in love. I mean, that's the kind of love God said he has for us. So it is interesting that third time, he shifted words on him to a much deeper level. Like, okay, so we're brothers. You love me? Yes, but do you agape? Do you love me so much now that you'll give it all in that word? And it's funny that he was hurt because it's almost like he's thinking, you don't trust me.
Yeah. Well, I think it was a response. I think
Loving God becomes a reality, and it's for everyone.
That's right.
No matter what happens.
But I think he also did this is because when you look at when he was calling down curses, I looked up that word, and it's kind of an unusual word. It's that word anathema, anathematha, or how do you say that?
That's it, anathema.
Yeah, and it's like he was declaring that I'm cut off from. I can't be any more stronger than I am not with them. It is like
it's the same
chasm.
It's the same word that Paul used in, I think it's Romans 9 or 10, where he says, "I would be anathema. I would be cut off and cursed if I could save all the Jews." In other words,
if that's what it took.
If that's what it took.
So that's
a super strong word.
That's so extreme. Just a few days ago, and now you have agape love, which I would venture to say is the exact opposite of his being cut off. In his denial is having a loving, unselfish, sacrificial. It's not about me. I'm not doing this for profit. I'm not doing this for just to get the blessings. I'm looking for the blessing giver. I mean, I love you because I love you. There's no. I'm not trying to get to, and I think that's full circle what redemption does. Because you think about it, he did something about his guilt and his shame. He redeemed not only his sins and guilt, but his reputation. Because I mean, I'm sure everyone is aware of this conversation and the reinstatement that happened. he's now wanting to use him, which is crazy. That's why I said no other religious world would. I mean, he's fallen too far. But
3 strikes, you're out.
yeah, God's like, I want to use
1 strike maybe, but 3 in a row, you're out.
Yeah, and I think it also gave him the freedom to, in all this, to have a sense of humor, to get over his past, to live now as forgiven and redeemed. I mean, which is, I think, what grace does to us all. I mean, part of the reason I think our family resonated with people when we did our little show is that we were willing to, laugh at each other and despite, we're not unlike anybody else. We all have mistakes and all, but there's something about being in Christ where you're forgiven. It gives you confidence that you know why this is happening. So, we point people to God and his message of grace through Jesus. But this transformation allows you to laugh at the little stuff, even our past, Right. I mean, it's not like we're taking sin lightly, but we just realize that, once you're redeemed, you're redeemed. There's no condemnation in Christ Jesus. You've been justified because of who Jesus is and what he did and what he does. And that's why you have real joy and real peace. It's hard to explain that to people who haven't been soaked in God's grace and love.
Right.
But you see here, I think Jesus said this somewhere, the bigger the fall, the bigger the appreciation. And a lot of people are like, well, does that mean I'll go sin a bunch? No, it just means you just wouldn't think that he could have ever recovered over this. But he did. And it had nothing to do with him.
Well, and he put that, one of the references you're talking about is also in Luke 7, where he told Simon, the bigger the acceptance of forgiveness, the bigger the capacity to love.
Yeah,
that was the way he framed it.
In fact, the love of Jesus is never questioned in any of this.
Right.
With Peter going up and down, up and down.
That's right.
Saying one thing and doing another.
Oh, he just loved him. I mean, God's unoffendable.
That's right.
He'll forgive you.
That's right.
And it's really hard for people. There's a lot of people that use this as an excuse, this right here, for not coming to Christ.
A lot of people, you make one mistake, and you're out.
Well, they don't like it. People doesn't like a system that they feel is not fair. And they're like, if a guy does all these heinous sins and there's another guy who's a pretty good moral person, you're putting them on the same line. And that's just not fair.
That's right.
But God said, oh, yeah, it's fair. I'm forgiving them. That's why he tells the stories about, I hired some guys early in the morning and I agreed to pay them. And then I hired some real late and I paid them the same thing.
That's right.
You're like, what? That's not fair. Well, it's a picture of grace.
They're making as much as we are.
Yeah,
We're working half.
It's a picture of grace. There's some people that, boy, they did a lot of cutting up. And you got to realize God knows the heart, so you're not going to hoodwink him. And he knows who's sincere. And Peter was sincere. Judas wasn't.
Yep.
Well, Judas ended up in a ditch, with his
turned away.
Guts spilled out. Yeah, he turned away. That was the difference, So even when Peter was following at a distance, I do think there was something there. Hey, as long as you're still scrapping, you're still alive, you're still searching, you'll have these encounters with Jesus that matter, which is really, even though it was frustrating for him, boy, I'm telling you, it was like turning on a switch, because you read the rest of the Bible, and Peter is a stud. I mean, he is a star.
And you think about it, it's definitely his charisma and his potential that God and Jesus knew all along. Because remember how he came in? Remember, it was Andrew, his brother, and Andrew and Nathaniel had been following John the Baptist. So these guys had been understanding way before these other ones. And so their thought was, boy, if we can get old Peter, it's sort of like what Jan said about you. If we could ever get Phil, we could do something. And that's what they were thinking about him. So even though these epic failures are there in those 3 years, Jesus always saw the potential for Peter.
Yep.
When he gets this turned around, you ain't going to believe what you're going to see, and which is what I want to talk about in the overtime we get there, because when you look through the first 12 chapters in Acts, I mean, Peter's a rock star of the beginning of the church, but you really don't understand how great that really is until you see him in this moment. And just in a little bit of time we have left, Jason, I did think it was interesting that Peter, at the end of John, when he tells him, basically how he's going to die. I mean, he doesn't give him the specifics, but it's like, it's not going to be good. And he looks over at John and says, what about him? In other words, if this is going to be so bad, what about this guy? And then Jesus said, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me. And we talked about this back when we were in Mark 13, but the idea is the idea of Jesus coming and going, and we talked about the destruction of Jerusalem, but Jesus also is going to reveal himself to John in Revelation, which is the last thing we're going to get in Scripture. And so what he's saying is, I got something else for him. You just need to focus on you. But it obviously
it's kind of like he reinstated him, he loved him, he received his love, and then he slapped his hand and said, hey.
Because once again, Peter says that one thing that's just
this is not about you and your compadres.
That's exactly right. Well, so we're out of time for this episode, but we'll do a little bit more about some of Peter's, some of the great things he did in our overtime segment. So if you want to follow over and catch that, it's on blazetv.com/unashamed.
Thanks for listening to the Unashamed podcast. Help us out by rating us on iTunes. And don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube, and be sure to click that little bell to get notified about new episodes. And for even more content that you won't get anywhere else, subscribe to Blaze TV at blazetv.com/unashamed.